Chip Zdarsky's recent run on Batman has more people than ever asking the question, who is the Batman of Zur En Arrh? The current interpretation of Zur En Arrh is that he's Bruce's own self-installed Manchurian candidate. The idea being that Batman made himself his own subconscious Winter Soldier, with Zur En Arrh being like a backup personality that could take over if Batman ever went too far. But Zur En Arrh is a concept that goes back decades, with his first appearance being in 1958's Batman issue 113. And just to drive home how goofy this era of Batman was, this is one of 3 different stories in the issue. But another one of those stories has Batman teaming up with a character you've probably never heard of. It has Batman teaming up with, and wait for it, with Fatman, who is just Fat Batman. I know it sounds made up, but if you don't believe me, here's the wiki article. Fatman only ever appeared once in this exact comic, and then he never showed up again. But Fatman is just one example of how weird and bizarre some of the Silver Age Batman stories can be. So that's an important factor to consider when you think about the context for Batman Zur En Arrh's creation. This is a story that was written 8 years before Adam West's Batman was ever even a thing. This is just what Batman was like in the 50s and early 60s. This was their Batman from their era.
You guys have him up against Santas and Easter bunnies? I'm sorry, but that's not my Batman.
He's faster than a speeding atomic jet. With ease, he leaps over the tallest of buildings. Ray bullets bounce harmlessly off of his chest. Is it a bird? A plane? No! It's the Batman! And this time there's a whole host of surprises for the caped crime buster of Gotham City as he embarks on an amazing out-of-this-world adventure to become Batman, the Superman of Planet X.
In this story, the Batman of Zur En Arrh is an alien Batman from another planet. He lives on Planet X, where they've been watching Batman through a telescope that can see Earth, with the idea being that our Batman inspired their Batman, with their Batman using their advanced alien technology to become the sci-fi Batman of this retro-futuristic alien world. He uses gadgets like the Bat Radio, a device that lets him control technology.
The Bat Radio, one of my better crime-fighting inventions.
He can control computers and cars, which basically makes him Alien Watch Dogs Batman Beyond. So this is an odd little note I had about the character. If you want to look at things in a multiversal singularity kind of way, the Batman of Zur En Arrh's eyes are upside-down versions of Batman's normal eyes. But the funny thing is that it makes him look like the Batman from the animated series in the 90s. The meta-Batman from 40 years in the future. But we're getting off topic. The meta-narrative discussion is better saved for future videos. So the DC Universe exists as a complex process that's running through thousands of people's brains at any given time. And if multiple people are having the same ideas, then does that mean that the people are manifesting those ideas? Or are the ideas manifesting themselves through these people? And does that mean that those ideas are sentient and have some sort of life of their own? Do these ideas have a sense of self-awareness that's expressed through the creators? If we can concede that the fifth dimension is in fact imagination, and that there's no clear separation between the metaphorical and literal way that wizards think, then that means that the idea of God is the God. The God has been manifested by the actions of those who create it. So does that mean that the DC Universe can become self-aware? Or has it already? Did people have these ideas, or did the ideas have the people? Who manifests the manifestations? Did we create the DC Universe, or did the DC Universe create us? But remember how I said that in his first appearance, the 1950s Batman of Zur En Arrh looks like the 1990s Batman from Batman the Animated Series? Well, Batman the Brave and the Bold actually made an episode about Zur En Arrh, adapting the original issue from the 1950s, having Batman the Animated Series alumni, Kevin Conroy, reprise his role as the Caped Crusader, only this time voicing the Batman of Zur En Arrh instead of our traditional Batman. So, the funny thing about that is that this alternate Batman from the 1950s looks like the cartoon Batman from the 90s, and when they adapted him in 2010, they got the voice actor from the 90s cartoon to voice the alternate Batman from the 50s, who happens to resemble him. Did people have these ideas, or did the ideas have the people? Years later, in Grant Morrison's 2006 run on Batman, they reintroduced the Batman of Zur En Arrh as a subconscious alter ego that exists inside of Bruce Wayne's mind. A backup Batman that could take over if Bruce ever found himself lacking. In this story, the original comic was a hallucination that Bruce experienced while he was being brainwashed, and that hallucination inspired him to create this backup personality that could subconsciously combat future attempts at mind control or the worst case scenario of a Batman gone rogue. Decades later, after a brutal physical and psychological attack at the hands of Dr. Hurt, Bruce was left amnesiac, wandering the streets of Gotham with the ghost of a homeless man. After the homeless man disappears, a primal instinct kicks in, and he starts using sewing needles to sew a Batman suit out of trash. Unlike the cheesy alien Batman of the 1950s, this iteration of Zur En Arrh is just feral. When he's triggered, he becomes a Batman with no Bruce Wayne, displaying what an unhinged Batman with no connection to human empathy would be like. His demons are amplified to a 10, and the city personifies his subconscious by speaking to him. And then Batmite appears. Batmite was a recurring character back in the Silver Age 1950s books. He was an imp with the powers of a god that could alter reality. He's basically Larry from Teen Titans 2003 or Mr. McZultiplix, but for Batman. Still, after the crisis in the 80s, he was kind of forgotten about as a comic character, as the comics adopted this more serious tone. Batmite appears to Zur En Arrh as this kind of like sidekick that explains everything to Batman with this kind of Deadpool-like fourth wall breaking fifth dimensional awareness. In this story, the intentional vagueness kind of keeps it unclear whether or not Batmite is a hallucination of Zur En Arrh, or if he actually is the Batmite from the 1950s, breaking the fourth wall and talking to Bruce through his subconscious. And when Zur En Arrh asks him the question directly, Batmite claims that he's from the fifth dimension, which is imagination, which just doubles down on the question of whether or not any of this was real in the first place. The story serves to connect different plot threads and forgotten bits of Batman's lore and history from the Silver Age, and then kind of recontextualize and rework them into something new that works in the more serious and gritty continuity of the 2000s. The idea is that these stories still happen, but now after the reboots, they happened in a different way and under different contexts and circumstances than they were initially understood in the 50s. And everything inside of the story is kept kind of vague on purpose, because the idea is that the interpretation of the canon, the interpretation of the story, the interpretation of the myth, the fable, the legend, it's all up to the viewer. Fans are constantly trying to make sense of canon and continuity and squeeze things into a neat little timeline that makes sense. And editors are always trying to shift the tones of individual books to match the tone of the line and of the universe as a whole, even if it contradicts the character's stories, lore, or history. But the brutal reality of the situation is that those timelines will never make sense, and the tones of these books will never properly align, because the books are always going to reflect the tones of the authors and the eras that they're written in, which kind of makes it impossible to force continuity into a timeline that quote-unquote works. The characters, their lore, and their history, it's not supposed to make sense. But that being said, it's still kind of fun to play around with those ideas and try to rework old ideas into fitting into a new modern context. But the idea is that continuity is fluid, and that these are stories that are designed to be told and retold and reinterpreted and built upon. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't all fit into one timeline or one singular tone, because it's not supposed to. There's a line that Joker says in this that seems to apply to exactly what I'm saying, and I can't get my mind off of it. That wouldn't be the real joke, would it? The real joke is your stubborn, bone-deep conviction that somehow, somewhere, all of this makes sense. That's what cracks me up every time. All the symbolism, all the hints and clues that pass Batman stories, it's all designed from Joker as a series of red herrings to throw off Batman. And it's designed by Grant Morrison to throw off the reader who's trying to make sense of things and figure out what's going to happen next. There's a quote from Grant Morrison that seems to apply really well to how fans look at canon. What I'm saying is that there's no clear choice when it comes to continuity. And just like Joker's origin, canon is multiple choice, and it always has been. Just like Joker was trolling Batman to provoke a reaction, Morrison was trolling the reader to provoke engagement. And it worked. People are still trying to work out the symbolism and foreshadowing in this run of Batman. They even connect it to events that are happening in the modern books 20 years later. People still talk about this book because it was designed to make them talk and theorize about it. There's even this whole fan theory about it called the Hyper Crisis, and it's so dense and so complicated, and it looks at comic books from a literary angle, from a continuity angle, as well as this weird metacontextual philosophical angle, and it makes me feel like I have to do this whole series on canon and continuity as a whole, just to get people ready for how dense it is before I start work on it. And this is video 2 in that series, so with that being said, let's get back to the Batman of Zur En Arrh, and we'll come back around to the Hyper Crisis theory and Grant Morrison comic books one day in the future.
Also in the past.
Since then, the Batman of Zur En Arrh has made a few appearances across different video games, including Arkham Knight, Gotham Knights, and Scribblenauts. I know Gotham Knights isn't the best game ever, but I'm a big fan of how the Zur En Arrh color swaps look in the game. This one on Jason Todd is one that I find myself using more often than not. And the suit just looks amazing in Arkham Knight. It's like spot on an adaptation from the Morrison run. I couldn't be happier with it. And when you see Zur En Arrh in Scribblenauts, he has the bat from Morrison's run, which is a really nice little touch. You get it, because he's Batman with a bat. Oh, shut the fuck up now. In Zdarsky's 2022 run on Batman, Zur En Arrh popped up all over again. Only this time he's a lot more reserved. He acts a lot more like the 1950s Silver Age Batman than the feral iteration that we saw in Batman Rest in Peace back in 2007. Like this one part where he calls Robin chum. It's a little cheesy, but I do really love seeing Silver Age tropes get repurposed into the modern era in a kind of meta way. This run builds on a ton of different stories from Batman's past, from Tower of Babel to Morrison's 2006 run, and even the last 2 runs by Tom Taylor and Tom King. So Zur En Arrh was the failsafe backup Batman that was supposed to take over if Batman ever went rogue. But Zur En Arrh also built a robot to take him down if he ever went rogue. So Batman made a failsafe for if he went rogue, and that failsafe made a failsafe for if he ever went rogue, and then named it Failsafe. Just like Batman created contingency plans for the League and Tower of Babel and Justice League Doom, this was Batman's failsafe for his failsafe. A Batman robot designed to take out a subconscious Batman that's designed to take out Batman. I fucking love comic books. There have been a ton of different stories where Batman was framed for a crime or for someone's death, and during those times, the failsafe robot would activate, but then Alfred could deactivate it if he knew that Bruce was innocent. But ever since Alfred died in Tom King's 2016 run, there's been no one left to keep the robot from activating, leading to the robot taking over Gotham City and turning it into a police state. Again, this is actually the second run in a row where Gotham has been turned into a police state. So Zurr and Arrh and Robin fight Failsafe with lightsabers and lose, and then Superman Deus Ex Machinas them out of there. But Failsafe has contingency plans for all the vigilantes in Gotham, as well as the Justice League at large, making it pretty much unstoppable to any of the heroes. But if you want to know how Batman takes down Failsafe, you're gonna have to read the story for yourself, because that's beside the point. There's a second backup story in Zdarsky's run on Batman that gives a little bit more detail to what was going on in the Morrison run. It's a flashback story that's told from the perspective of Batman's Black Casebook, a diary where he writes about all the adventures and unsolved mysteries that are just too bizarre to be explained, including that of the Batman of Zur En Arrh. The story provides some additional context to Zur En Arrh's creation in the current timeline, building off of different ideas that were introduced in Morrison's 2006 run, and really layering things on in an interesting way that adds new layers of depth for returning readers, and then reintroduces the concept for newcomers. After his psychic attack at the hands of Dr. Milo, Bruce began work on a procedure to create his own subconscious failsafe. The story details how he built out his mindscape to enable the subconscious Batman's creation after his attack at the hands of Dr. Milo. He maps out his mind like the grids of Gotham City, which is a callback to the Morrison run in 2006. And there's this really, really beautiful moment after Zur En Arrh takes control of Bruce's mind, where there's this subconscious conversation between Batman, Zur En Arrh, the Joker, and whatever's left of what Joker was before. It's Batman convincing Zur En Arrh that killing is wrong, because it's not something his parents would have been proud of, and it goes against everything his parents ever taught him or believed in. It wouldn't be honorable to them, and that's the whole point of Batman, is to honor their memory. Because even Bruce's mom or dad would have wanted to save a person like the Joker. That's just the kind of compassionate people they were. So in the end, Bruce finishes programming Zur En Arrh, and just like Zur En Arrh is an extension of Bruce and an extension of Batman, Zur En Arrh imprints a part of his symbology onto Batman as well, with the implication being that the yellow backing behind Batman's logo has always been representative of Zur En Arrh. But you know what the funny thing about that is? The first appearance of Batman's traditional yellow symbol was in a Batman comic in 1964, but Zur En Arrh first appeared in 1958, predating the original yellow bat symbol by 6 years. So in real life, and now in the comic book continuity as well, Zur En Arrh had the yellow bat symbol first, and Chip Zdarsky just took that little piece of trivia and made it canon. And that's just one of the many reasons I love comic books.
Who manifests the manifestations?
Oh yeah, and I never really mentioned, do you know what Zur En Arrh stands for? Do you know what that actually means? It's the last words that Thomas Wayne said to his son before he died. They probably put someone like Zorro in Arkham. Zur En Arrh. In the world of Batman, there's always been this really dumb debate over who's the real identity of the Caped Crusader. Is the real identity Bruce, or is it Batman? And in the Nolan movies, the idea that Bruce Wayne is the mask and Batman is the persona is at the core of the story. But personally, I've always kind of hated that interpretation of the character. The Batman of Zur En Arrh is Batman without Bruce Wayne. He's the worst parts of Bruce's ego and pride. He's Batman without restraint or empathy. He's the embodiment of aggression and the drive to complete the mission at any cost. He's Batman without Bruce, and he's not well. For the last 20 years, the modern Batman comics have focused on building out the Batfamily and bringing them all back together. Batman's search for Bruce Wayne and his life as a father, a mentor, and a brother have been at the core of the narrative for the last 20 years, all going back to Grant Morrison's run in 2006. In the past, when he experienced tragedy after tragedy, like Jason's death or Damian's death, Bruce pushed his loved ones away. But now, after the death of Alfred, he starts keeping them closer than ever before, because that's what Alfred would have wanted. That's the meta Batman, meta evolving. The idea of Batman changing and evolving to grow with the times and the readers that are reading it. And when you try to say that Bruce Wayne is the mask and Batman is the person, it's just a complete regression of all the work that comic book writers have put in for the last 20 years. But it's that character development that shows that Batman has a heart. And that heart's name is Bruce Wayne. The meta Batman, the idea of Batman, has evolved. He's not just a brooding gothic loner who'll sacrifice his friends and family for the mission. the heart and the soul of the 1950s Silver Age Batman, who loved his friends and family with an undying passion. That Bruce Wayne is still inside the tortured shell of our modern Batman. But unfortunately, stuff like Frank Miller's Dark Knight and Zack Snyder's take on the character, they've all tried to revert Batman back to the angry, narcissistic, sociopathic, grim version that he used to be. Comic book writers have been working to kill that version of the character for the past 2 decades. And I'm not saying you gotta leave all that on the table. You can still have some of those traits in a modern Batman. But you can't leave out the love, because that's so crucial to the character. There's been a push for a Batman that inspires hope instead of fear, and seeks out justice rather than vengeance, and fights his crusade with love rather than with anger.
Batman,
Ace.
they were training me, turning me into a weapon for justice, they said. They got their weapon. I got cheated out of my childhood.
I know what that's like.
You do, don't you? I'm dying very soon.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Could you stay with me? I'm scared.
He sat with her until her time came. That's the Bruce Wayne I came to know over the years.
I live in New York, and after the attacks on 9/11, I was into this dining hall, and this is, the first week after the attack, and there'd been like just this somber sadness, and you hear him go, Guys, you're not gonna believe who's been cooking your dinners. It's Batman. He said, then someone else says, make him prove it. So I thought, oh, this is good. So I'm in the back kitchen, and I do from the back kitchen, I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman. There's this long pause, and then you hear from the back of the place, holy that is Batman. And suddenly people were laughing. And the architect who had recognized me said, what's it feel like to be Santa Claus? I said, because that's what just happened here.
So I've got a lot of opinions on Batman, and I'm trying to work them all into a 5-part series on Batman, and this video was part 2. So if you haven't seen part 1, or you want to see one of the other videos after this one, you can check those out in the playlist on the card above. I'd like to give a very special shout out to my lovely Patreons. Thank you so much for keeping the swim ship sailing. And if you're interested in early access to videos or just want to support the channel in general, you can join my Patreon here, and it'd be greatly appreciated. Plus you get your name next to these fine folk here in every video. And if you're interested in more ComicTube, you can check out our ComicTube where we share our favorite ComicTube videos. You can expect more Super Swim Team 7 videos in the future. But in the meantime, I'm hoping to do some live streams every other Sunday night or so be sure to keep an eye out for those. But with all that being said, I've been Swim Team Captain 7 of Super Swim Team 7, signing off.